everyone. Today is part 2 of me ranking all of the movies that I watched in 2021. Today's video is about the movies that were released in 2020 or 2019 or 2018. Everything that wasn't released in 2021, which was the previous video that I already did. And I've also already done rankings on books and TV shows, and I'm going to do albums next. But so again, just to do a brief overview of the ranking system, it's pretty simple. A, B, C, D, F. The A's are the good ones, the F's are the bad ones, and it's all just my opinion and how memorable it was. And I'll be talking about all the new watches first, and then at the end I'll get into things that I rewatched. So that's pretty much it. So let's get into it. First up is Mulan. This is the Disney live action remake, and there's going to be a lot of those on here. I watched pretty much all of them, and this one was okay. This definitely got a bad rap. A lot of the live action movies are pretty unnecessary, but I think I'm going to put this one in C tier. It definitely had some good things about it. I liked the visuals. It was really pretty and colorful. I liked some of the musical orchestrations in the back. That was one thing that people didn't like, was that it wasn't a musical. And that does hurt it a little bit, I think, but I also appreciate that they did something with it, that they tried to do something new, because a lot of the other ones are pretty much exact remakes of the cartoon, which is, then there's not really any reason to ever watch the live action ones. But yeah, so I think ultimately I liked that Mulan took some risks compared to some of the other live action remakes. Next is Gerald's Game. This is a Netflix original from a few years ago, and it's based off of a Stephen King book, which is basically about this woman who gets handcuffed to the bed and her husband dies and she's trapped and, has to find a way to get out. So this one I think I'm gonna put in D tier. It's a horror movie, but it really wasn't very scary at all for me. There was one moment that was scary, and that was pretty much it. And the rest was kind of a inner revelation, realization. It was more about kind of her self-healing journey and that kind of thing. It wasn't really horror to me, and it was kind of boring because she's in the same place pretty much the whole movie, so it was just a little bit lacking for me. Next is Climax, which is, I think it came out in 2018, something around there. It's A24, and it's about, it's kind of hard to talk about this one without going into spoilers, but it's about this group of dancers that spends the night together and things just go off the rails. That's what I'll say. But this one was really interesting. This is definitely one of the most memorable movies of the year for me, and similar to Malignant, which I ranked in the last video for part 1 movies. This one I'm just completely torn on it. Like, on one side I can kind of see the artistic qualities of it and what makes it genius in a way, but then on the other hand it was really painful to watch, and as in I was really bored kind of way. And it also, I didn't think it was very scary at all. A lot of people online were saying that they thought it was really scary. I didn't really think that was the case, but it did kind of leave like a weird feeling with me though. Like, the next couple of days it just kind of made me feel like kind of yucky when I would think about the movie. So it was kind of, I guess, scary in that lingering kind of way. And also this has like some of the best dance scenes ever, so I do really like that about it. but I'm going to put that in C just because I'm really torn about it. But it's for sure memorable and I think worth it to, give it a try. Next is Aladdin. This is another Disney live action remake with Will Smith. It's Aladdin. I think everyone pretty much knows what it is. But this one was kind of fun too while I watched it. I liked the colors, I liked the dance sequences, I liked the music, but would I ever watch this one over the cartoon? No. And this is completely unmemorable. Like, I wouldn't have remembered that I watched that this year. I liked the casting. I thought Aladdin was good, and Jasmine and Genie, and I did like that they took some risks. They did change the story a little bit, but it still wasn't enough to make this its own distinct movie. So I think I might put that in D. I'll put it in C just because it was okay. It just wasn't too memorable. Next is Jungle Book, another Disney live action movie. This was one of the first ones they did. And everyone says that this one was the best, but I don't really know if I thought it was necessarily way better than all these other ones. I'm going to put that in C also. It definitely was better. I think that it took a lot more risks and did more with the story, at least from what I remember from the original Jungle Book. That wasn't my favorite, so I haven't seen it too much, but from what I remember, it has a really good cast. It has some good like emotional moments. Like, I got invested in the story more than these other ones probably. It had some really cool visual stuff going on, but I don't think it, far surpassed these other ones, so I'm going to put it in C. Next is Lion King, which is another Disney live action remake, and it's not the last one I'm going to be talking about, but Lion King, I think I'm going to put that in F just because it was such a pain to get through. Like, I was not interested at all. This is, I think, the worst case of remaking the original. They did literally nothing new with this. It was shot for shot. Things were exactly the same, but worse. And there's been lots of videos that have analyzed this about how when you do live action with animals, it doesn't work as well because the facial features you can't really tell what's going on in their minds, and they're not as expressive. And also, it's just live action, so all of these colorful music sequences just it doesn't work very well in a live action format. So that's an F. It was just I couldn't even get through sitting this. Well, I did finish it, but it was really hard. I did not enjoy it at all. Next is Dumbo, and I think this is the last Disney live action movie. And I think I'm going to put that in D. And I did appreciate that this one took a lot of risks. It was really different. They did new stuff with the story. The first one didn't have much of a story. This one was more about the circus and about the family. But I think it was a little disjointed. There was kind of two separate stories that happened, and visually, it's Tim Burton, so visually, I think it's interesting. This Dumbo was really cute. There were some good things about it that I liked, obviously, but overall, it was kind of, I didn't really like it very much. Next is Babes in Toyland. This is a musical from the 60s, which is also apparently a Christmas movie, which I didn't know when I watched it. And it has Annette Funicello in it and some other old time actors that I can't really remember their names, but it's basically a musical about this kind of fairy tale Mother Goose land. And I think I'm going to put that in F. I usually really like those old musicals, but this was, and this is Disney also, by the way. And I usually like those old-timey musicals, but this one was scary. It felt like a made-for-TV musical. And also, I think something about Mother Goose stories just kind of freak me out. it just gives me weird vibes. So I didn't like that. I didn't like any of the songs. None of them stood out. None of the characters stood out. The story wasn't really interesting. There was kind of nothing good about it. Next is John Tucker Must Die. This is like a 2000s, I don't know, chick flick comedy kind of movie about this guy that is dating multiple women, and the women all find out, and then they start working together. And this one it was just okay. It definitely has not aged the best. I think I'm gonna put it in C. But I mean, it was fun while I watched it. It had good like 2000s vibes, but it hasn't really stuck with me that much at all. It has Brittany Snow in it. It has Penn Badgley in it. I liked those things. That's about all I remember. It had a good soundtrack too, I think. Next is Watchmen, which is this is the old 2000s movie version, and I think I'm gonna put that in F. That one is also like completely unmemorable. It was a pain to get through. It was too long. It was told in a weird order. It was all over the place. It was confusing. I didn't really care about anyone. That's pretty much all I'm going to say. Next is The Wicker Man. This is the 70s version. It's a British horror movie. Maybe it's kind of like a thriller or a mystery about this police officer that investigates an island where this girl has gone missing. And that's no question for me. That's an A. And I was not expecting to like this one really, because I've just heard that it's kind of slow and that kind of thing. But I was definitely really intrigued with the mystery, finding out what's going on. I didn't think this one was too scary, but I did just think it was interesting in terms of the mystery and figuring out what happens. So I just had fun uncovering the mystery and following along. And one thing that was really surprising that I really loved about it was that it was kind of a musical too. And when you look it up on Wikipedia, it is classified as a musical, which is really interesting that it's a horror musical. And the songs were really good too. I thought they were, really interesting and fun. And this is just one that kind of stuck with me for a long time that I am still thinking about. The ambiance is another thing that really stood out to me about this movie. This British island that's really isolated and the community is really connected with each other. This movie was just, I liked everything about it. Next is The Descent. This is another really famous horror movie that's about these girls that get trapped in a cave basically while they're cave exploring. And that's either a B or a C. It didn't really stand out much to me. It's not really too memorable, but it is more memorable than, or more interesting than some of these other ones. The scares weren't too scary for me personally, but I guess it was an interesting enough story to kind of see how they, try to get out of it and maneuver the situation. So I'll just leave it there for now. Next is Trial of the Chicago 7. I watched this one because it was nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars, and this one, I think I'm going to put that one in B. This has a really great cast, which I loved, and the movie is about this trial of these 7 people and kind of how almost corrupt the trial was, and what the events of what led up to the trial and the crime and that kind of thing. And it was just really interesting, the story, and intrigued me to learn more about the case. And it had funny moments too. I decently enjoyed this one. Next is Mank, which is another one that I watched for the Oscars Best Picture, just to, watch all of them and see which ones I thought should win. This one's an F. I I really like what this is attempting to do, which is recreate this old time Hollywood movie from, I think it's around the 30s or 40s. And I do think it recreated it really well with the film and the cinematography and the costumes and the accents and the music and all of that stuff. I think was done really well and really portrayed the aesthetic and the vibe and the ambiance of that time period. I thought all of that was done really well. But as far as the story, it was just terrible. I could not sit through it. I think it was 2.5 hours long. It was way too long. It was so boring. I couldn't tell what was going on. There's multiple timelines of stuff that's happening. This is pretty much about, I guess, the guy that wrote Citizen Kane, wrote the screenplay for it. And I can't even really tell you what happened in this movie because I was not following. I couldn't understand. There's a lot of background information that I think you need to be able to understand what's going on in this movie. And it was just torturous for me to get through. So, F. Next is Sound of Metal, which is another one that I watched for Oscar Best Picture viewing. And I'm going to put that one in B. That one's about this drummer who loses his hearing and is trying to come to terms with that. And this one's obviously really interesting in terms of the sound design and experimentation with that. And just story-wise, I thought it was done really well. And the performances were also really good. So I'm going to put that in B. Next is My Octopus Teacher. This is a documentary. I think it's a Netflix original that is about this guy that kind of befriends an octopus, I guess. He goes out to film it and interact with it and kind of becomes friends with it and documents its life. I think I'm going to put that one in A, even though that might be kind of cheesy. I thought it was really heartwarming and it's educational and the shots were just crazy. Like, I am just shocked about how this guy was able to capture all of these moments on camera. It's incredible. And it's just a really fulfilling story. We get, a good beginning, middle, and end, and it's all packaged really well. So I'm going to put that in A. Next is Promising Young Woman. This is about this woman. It's kind of a, I guess, revenge movie with Carey Mulligan. And I think I'm going to put that one in A. I think it is a little bit on the nose in a way. Narrative wise, it was really interesting, and there was some twists along the way, stuff that you don't expect that keep you engaged. So that's pretty much what I'm going to say about that one. Next is Goodbye Lenin, which is, I think it's a German movie, maybe? Not exactly. It's a foreign movie from 2000 something, 2005, something like that. And it's about, I'm really bad at history, so I really can't put into words what this movie is about, but it's basically about this son and his mom has kind of amnesia, and they lie to her about the state of the world, and there is a significant change in a big historical event that changes it, makes their whole world upside down, and they continue lying to her to say that things are still the same. So, obviously there's going to be kind of a culture shock when she realizes what's happening. So that's pretty much what this one is about. I'm really bad with history, so it was kind of hard for me to follow what's going on, which is definitely my bad that's not on the filmmakers, but I mean, this is my list and I didn't like it because of that, so I'm going to put it in D. And I think it was also just long and boring, but there were some things that I liked about it. Okay, next is Into the Woods. This is the PBS 90s recording of the stage musical, and this one was good. I'm going to put it in. This one's kind of interesting because I'm just going to put it in B just because it's not really something I would consider a standout movie of the year, but it's definitely something I appreciate being able to watch. I love having pro shots to be able to watch. I love that this has the original cast in it. And I've definitely it's stayed in my mind. I've been revisiting clips from it. But it's also kind of a rewatch in a way because I've seen the movie and know the music already, so it's not completely new to me. So I'm just going to put it in B. Next is House of a Thousand Corpses. This is a horror movie. It's about this group of friends that basically get stranded and come in contact with these crazy people. That's, I guess, what I'll say. It's kind of just a generic concept for a horror movie, which is why I'm going to put it in D. I don't think, that's kind of a story that we've heard a million times. The only thing that I guess makes it original is kind of the last 20 minutes or so. And I don't think any of the villains or the main characters are distinct at all. None of them are iconic villains to me. None of them are iconic death scenes. None of the scenes are really iconic, except when it comes to that last 20 minutes. It does have Rainn Wilson in it, which is interesting, but also makes it less scary. But there are some things about it that make it decently distinct, which is why it's not an F. But I don't think I would ever watch it again. But I would consider continuing on with the trilogy. Next is Last House on the Left. This is also kind of just a generic horror movie about crazy people that go on a killing spree, I guess. This one is an F. Just everything about it was so bad. It's from the 70s. It's like, it feels like not even a B movie. It's like way worse than a B movie, like the budget, and it feels like a homemade movie, and it's, there's not really a plot. It's just kind of gore and blood, and it's really sick. It's not it's not really fun horror, and it just real I did not want to continue watching it. It was just gross. It's not memorable either. I didn't like anything about it. Next is The Lovely Bones. I think this one's a D. It's from 2008, somewhere around there. It has a lot of big name people in it. It has Saoirse Ronan, Mark Wahlberg, Rachel Weisz. So it does have a really good cast, but it's really long and boring. There's stuff plot wise and character wise that just doesn't make sense. I don't think the visuals aged very well. It's kind of like a mystery, but you already know what happened. I don't know. I didn't like it. Next is Crawl. This is I guess it's an action horror, creature horror kind of movie about alligators, I guess, that, there's a hurricane and the alligators, it's flooding and there's alligators, and I think I'm actually going to put that one in B. I put it on as a joke, but it actually ended up being pretty interesting. The situations that happened and how, because it just sounds kind of ridiculous, like how would this possibly happen? But I think the situations made sense and it was interesting and there was good character stuff happening simultaneously. So I'm going to put that in B. And it has Kaya Scodelario in it, which I like. Next is Audrey. This is a 2020 documentary about her life. And I'm going to put that one in C, I think. It was just kind of general information about her life. I don't think there was anything super interesting that I learned. I think most of it was I've already heard most of it at some point. But as with all of these documentaries about famous celebrities, I just like seeing all of this compiled footage of them and scenes of them acting and interviews about how they were in real life. But it wasn't a huge standout for me, so I'm going to put that in C. Next is Tu Mama Tambien. This is a foreign movie. I think it might be Mexican, about these two, I think they're high schoolers that go on a road trip. It's very foreign. A lot of the stuff is kind of taboo, I think, for Americans. But it did kind of stick in my mind for a little bit. It takes a while to get into it to kind of see where it's going. I liked the relationship between the two boys and almost the hijinks of what happens. And yeah, I think I'm going to put that one in B. Actually, I think I'm going to put it in C. It's just not too... I did like it kind of while I was watching it, but I don't know if it's too memorable. And there were things that I liked about it, but there was also things that I don't think were super well done. And I know that this movie is really well loved in kind of artsy circles, but I thought it was almost a little messy in a way. Next is Kim. I think this is a Netflix original from a few years ago. It's a horror movie about this cam girl, and she gets her identity stolen, I guess you could say. And I'm going to put that in C. I think it was pretty forgettable for me. I think there was some themes or like messages that I didn't really understand. Horror wise, it wasn't really scary. Narrative wise, it was interesting. It was interesting just to follow around the characters and see what happens and try to unravel the mystery. But also the mystery didn't quite make sense in the end to me, which is why I think there's some kind of theming or messaging behind it that I'm not following. But it was decently interesting while I was watching it, so C. Next is Scarface. I think I'm going to put that in A, actually. This is the first time I've watched this movie. It's a classic, obviously. It's basically about this guy's rise to become a high-level drug dealer, I guess. And one thing that, it super didn't age well is Al Pacino doing a Cuban accent. That for sure didn't age well and was really hard for me to see past at first. It was just so ridiculous. But it has Michelle Pfeiffer in it. And just narrative wise, plot wise, it was really interesting to see his journey, and it's almost like a horror movie too. There's some really scary bits in there, which I always like, and I also thought it was interesting seeing his character develop and his relationships develop over the course of the movie. Next is The Girl Next Door. I think I'm gonna put that one in D. This is also just another chick flick comedy. I don't even know if it's a chick flick. It might be like more of a boy comedy from the 2000s, but it was just not very interesting. I don't think it was very funny. I think John Tucker was at least kind of funny, and I liked the camaraderie of the girls. This Girl Next Door, there wasn't not really anything redeeming about it, but I don't think it also wasn't terribly bad. So I'm going to put that in D. Next is Eastern Promises, which is, I guess, a Russian mafia movie, which I don't really remember much about. I'm going to put it in C. I think it was a little bit confusing. Yeah, I think it's mostly just confusing. That's why I can't really recall much about it. I thought it was okay. There were some cool action scenes in it. Next is After We Collided. This is the second movie in the After series. I think I'm gonna put that in D. But it's almost like so bad it's good. That's kind of why I watch these movies, is just that they're just like silly 50 Shades of Grey kind of movies. And so this is the second one in the series. It's just a romance about these college age kids, and the guy is like dark and troubled, I guess. But from what I remember, this one was even worse than the first one. The romance, I don't care about. The characters, I don't care about. They make stupid mistakes. The plot isn't interesting at all. This one at least had some more cast members that I cared about. Dylan Sprouse was in this. It's just really bad, I think. Next is The Strangers. I think I'm going to put that one in C. This one is just a home invasion horror movie. This one I think it's a little bit boring. It's only two people in the same house over the course of the movie, so every time they do that, it kind of, it can get a little bit boring, but also at the same time, it's kind of impressive that they're able to mostly keep my attention over the course of an hour and a half. But it wasn't too scary, really wasn't very memorable, but also it didn't really piss me off or anything. So I'm going to leave that in C. Next is The Social Dilemma. I'm going to put that in C also, I think. It's a documentary about social networks, and it's a Netflix original. And I think this one had a lot of hype around it. Which might be why I didn't enjoy it as much, is just because it wasn't as impressive as I thought it would be. I think it was a little bit pretentious too, without really explaining what really the issues were that were going on. So I'm going to leave that in C. Next is When a Stranger Calls. This is another horror movie. I'm seeing a trend. I watched a lot of horror this year, I guess. And this one's just about this girl that's babysitting, and she keeps getting these weird calls that someone's watching her. So, and I think this is a remake from a movie from the 70s, which I haven't seen. But I'm going to put that in D, I think. It was just a lot of dumb mistakes, wasn't very interesting. The house was really cool. It was in like a rich person house. So I liked that. I liked that it had really good 2000s vibes. Like the hair and the costumes were so spot on. Like it wasn't movie interpretation. It was like that's actually how people dressed back then, which I liked seeing. But it wasn't really too memorable. So D. Next is The Children's Hour. This is a movie from the 60s with Shirley MacLaine and Audrey Hepburn. I think I'm going to put that in C, this movie is about these two women that run. Actually, I'm going to put it in B, just because I think the concept is super interesting, which is why I watched it. And I think it's a really interesting concept. And I think it's almost shocking that I have never heard about this movie before, as someone who, I really like Audrey. I really like old movies, 50s and 60s especially, and I've never heard of this movie, and I pretty much watched it immediately once I heard about it. So this movie is about these two women who run a children's school, and one of the kids is a real brat and tells she gets in trouble by the two women and basically spreads a rumor to her grandma that the two women are gay, and then the rumor spreads and everyone is shocked and everyone pulls their kids out of the school because of this scandal. And so I think that was just a really interesting topic to be covered in the 60s and with such mainstream actresses. And so it was just interesting for me to see that topic be covered in the lens of the 60s. And plot wise, it's just interesting to see the development of what happens. So next is Candyman. This is the original from the 90s. I think I'm going to put that one in B also. It's a horror movie, and it's kind of about, I guess, the urban legend of the Candyman. And this woman I think she's a grad student, and she goes to investigate the urban legend of the Candyman. And I do think it's convoluted. Same with the remake. They're a little too convoluted and don't make sense for my taste, but it's also something that has captured my attention and really has interested me in learning more about it, reading the short story that it's based off of, seeing other interpretations or what it's supposed to mean. And there were some really good scares in it as well. Next is Jennifer's Body. I think I'm going to put that one in B. I'll put it in B for now. This one has a really good cast in it as well. Megan Fox, who I love, Amanda Seyfried, Adam Brody. I forget who else is in it, but it's basically about, I guess it's like a teen movie. It's also a horror. It's kind of like a comedy horror, I guess, about, I don't know, I guess vampires kind of. And it's definitely edgy humor, stuff that might not have aged too well, but it's kind of edgy on purpose. Like it knows it's messed up, but it still says that stuff. And it was really funny. I thought the performances were really good. It's really interesting story-wise. So I really enjoyed that one. Next is Little Shop of Horrors. I'm going to put that one in. I'm going to put it in C for now. It's a musical that is about, I guess, this guy that has a talking plant and then starts feeding it humans. But I think I would put it, no, I'm going to put it in B. I think I really loved the beginning to the middle, and then I think the middle to the end kind of dragged a lot, and there weren't, the songs weren't as interesting, and just the story was a little bit repetitive and boring. But I did really, really like the beginning, and it had some really good musical numbers, especially because I think it's hard for me to register with musical numbers the first time I see it. Once I've seen it multiple times and start to know the songs, then it catches on a little bit more. But so it's kind of impressive that these songs in the beginning half stuck in my mind so well. And I do think there's a lot of good things going for it. It's campy. The casting is really good. So I'm going to leave that in B. Next is What a Girl Wants. I think I'm going to put that in F tier. It's a rom-com, like 2004-ish. Amanda Bynes, Colin Firth is in this. It's about this teenager who goes to England to meet her real dad, who I think is also a prince or something. And this one, I usually love rom-coms. I did like the 2000s vibe. I always love that. And I usually like these kinds of movies, like the Princess Diaries kind of movies, but And I like Amanda Bynes too, but I did not like this movie at all. I think it was not done very well. There were so many shots where I was like, this is completely blurry. Like, how did this actually get through in a mainstream movie? It was weird. But her character was just annoying. I didn't like her at all. I didn't really care about. And I think this is why she was annoying, was it didn't really seem like she cared about the dad. It seemed like she just wanted to meet him because he's famous, kind of thing. So didn't like her character, didn't really have any like emotional moments with the dad that I cared about. It kind of became more about the romance of like her and this boy that she met. There wasn't really much plot going on. I think a lot of it was just montagey stuff like, oh, look at my cool room, look at me going shopping. Not much substance there. F tier. Next is Final Destination. This is my first time watching this movie. I think I'm going to put it in B tier. It has a good cast. I think it had a good mystical quality, which I liked. Mystical, magical. I'm definitely interested in continuing the franchise. It's about this guy who is on a plane with his high school class, and he has a premonition that the plane is going to explode, so he freaks out, and a bunch of them get off the plane, and everyone's like, you're crazy, why did you make us get off the plane? And then they see that it crashes like he was telling everyone. So it was true, his vision. And because they escaped death comes after them one by one after that. So I think this was probably a pretty interesting and unique concept at the time. There's definitely been a bunch of copycats after that, I'm sure, but I do like the concept. And it also, there's going to be a lot of interesting death scenes after, as they kill off all the characters one by one. So I liked that one. It was interesting. Next is The Platform. This one is, I think it's Spanish, and it is about these people that sign up to be in this program where you have a roommate. There's 2 people on each floor, and it's a building of, there's like 200 floors. Everyone's on a different floor, and there's this platform that feeds everyone. It goes from the top to the bottom, and it's a free for all. You can eat however much you want. So the people at the top get to have whatever they want. The people at the bottom get whatever's left. And obviously just the people at the top eat more than their share and don't leave enough for people at the bottom. So as you get further down, there's just chaos between the roommates. So I just really liked the concept. I thought it was interesting, and there's obviously a lot of thematic elements that go into that as well, into this concept. So I'm going to put that in A. I don't think it was too scary though, but it did have some weird, gross moments. Next is 13 Ghosts. This is, I think it came out in 2000, and it's a horror movie. Don't really know how I'd explain this one either. It's about 13 ghosts that are in this house, I guess, and the people have to capture the ghosts, I guess is what you could say. But I think I'm gonna put this one in B tier. Wrong spot. It has a good cast. It has Tony Shalhoub. It has Matthew Lillard, who I love, and he definitely made all the difference in this movie. But I think this one just has immaculate 2000s vibes, but in a different 2000 vibes than these rom-coms. It has like a 2000s vibe, like more like Scooby-Doo, like this mystical kind of 2000s vibe. And it's definitely just interesting in a cult classic kind of way. Like, it's just very memorable. The ghosts are memorable. The vibes are memorable. The lore is just ridiculous. The ghosts are kind of ridiculous, but it's all interesting and very stylized, leaving that in B tier. Next is Freaky. This is, I think I'll put that in B tier. This is a 2020 horror comedy that has Catherine Newton, Vince Vaughn in it. It's about this serial killer and this teenage girl that switch bodies. So obviously these body switching movies are, it's just funny to see Vince Vaughn try to act like a girl. And it had some funny moments. The story was interesting to try to see them, work everything out. It was definitely enjoyable. Next is It Follows. That's definitely an A tier for me. I just liked so much about it. I love the vibes. It just has this weird atmosphere to it. This creepy off. Just something feels off. And the scare, it's about this monster that follows you basically, and it's transferred by hooking up with someone. So if you hook up with someone, then the monster starts following the new person instead, and to get rid of the monster you have to hook up with someone basically. And I just thought the monster was really creepy and the vibes were really creepy. That's pretty much it. It's mostly just the atmosphere that really, and the scares that really sucked me in. I was really frustrated with the movie because they do a lot of dumb stuff, I think. But in the end, in a horror movie, they have to do dumb stuff. Otherwise, there probably wouldn't be a movie if they did everything right. So that's understandable. But ultimately, it was just a very memorable, interesting, unique, scary movie that I watched in 2021. Next is Pride and Prejudice. I think that's D tier for me. As someone that just watched it for the first time, it wasn't very memorable. It's a romance based on the book. It's set in like the 1800s. It has a good cast, but I didn't really care about any of the relationships. It was very to me. And next is Hostel. I'll put that in C. This is obviously an iconic horror movie that is just, well, it's known for being very gory, but it wasn't actually that bad, which I think is interesting that it has that reputation when mostly it's just, most of the stuff is kept to your imagination. But it was interesting. It definitely revolutionized horror, but actually I think it's a D. It definitely revolutionized horror, but it was kind of really bad. And I think the main guy was a good actor, but pretty much everyone else was like a really bad actor. So I guess the problem with it is probably mostly the budget wasn't very high, but Eli Roth did with it what he could and obviously revolutionized the genre. But looking back on it, I don't think it was a very high quality movie. Next is Saw 3, and it's me talking about Saw is going to be completely off the rails because it's completely scattered, and I have some rewatches. 1 and 2 I've already seen, but I rewatched, and 3, 4, 5, 6 are all new. So I'll talk about those first. But Saw 3 is where it completely went off the rails. This is where they started being bad to me. But 3 was still okay, so I'll put it in. 3 was okay, but it still doesn't deserve C, I don't think. 3 is 3 is so weird. The first 15 minutes of it are is finishing up Saw 2, and then there's just a bunch of random traps, and then there's like, I don't know, 45 minutes of like another plot. It's just kind of all over the place, didn't know what it was doing. Parts of it were just kind of a montage of different traps and horror scenes. But this is also before it went completely off the rails, so I'm gonna leave that in D. Next is Tusk. This is another horror movie. I watched a lot of horror movies this year, but Tusk. This was definitely one of the most memorable horror movies I watched this year. It's about this man who is a podcaster who goes to interview this man and basically gets captured by him, and the guy wants to turn him into a walrus. That's what I'll say. And I think I'm gonna put it in D. As much as I want to put it in F, I do think it was really interesting, and it was kind of scary and sad. So I'll put it in D. And there's a lot of pluses and minuses. Justin Long is in this. I love him. Haley Joel Osment was in it too, which was interesting. Johnny Depp is in this too, which I didn't know until after. It's a pretty big part, but I didn't know it was Johnny Depp. So there's a good cast. There were parts where Justin Long was overacting, I thought, but it could have been a lot of other stuff. It could have been directing and editing and that kind of stuff. But there were also moments where Justin Long's acting was so superb. And I also just appreciate that this kind of came from a meme almost on Kevin Smith's podcast. And it started off as a joke and he turned it into this whole movie. And there are a lot of issues with the movie. But I do think it's kind of iconic in a way. So I'll leave that in D. Next is Deadpool, which I watched for the first time, and I don't really have to explain what this one is, but it's a superhero movie. I don't know, I'll put it in C. It was not memorable to me at all. And might as well just put Deadpool 2 in there too. I did not really care about either of these movies. They're both the same to me pretty much. I do kind of like quirky, like quip, when they do the quips, but this was a little bit too much for me, I found him more annoying than clever. So, and yeah, I didn't really care about the story or the action or any of that. So C tier for both of those. Okay, so Saw 4, this one is really messy. F. This is where it got so bad, so convoluted, didn't make sense, became a caricature of what the Saw franchise originally was. I hated this one. It made me so mad. It's so confusing. The twist in the end is just so overly complicated and dumb. I hate it. I think the next one's got a little bit better after this, but not much really. I still don't really understand what happened. It just got way too crazy. I hated it. Next is Saw 5, which I think is still an F, and it follows these two police officers that look exactly the same. They took like the most bland looking characters and made a movie about them when I didn't care about them at all. Also confusing. And Saw 6 is also an F. At this point, I think the plot got a little bit better for 6, but also at the same time it became like, well, starting at 3, it kind of started becoming a bad, like it felt like a straight to DVD kind of movie. But especially Saw 6 just felt like a whole nother level of like, this is really bad quality. But at least it wasn't as convoluted as the other ones. It wasn't as frustrating as these two, but it's still F tier. Next is Okja. I think I'm going to put that in B. This is about this girl that her family has this genetically modified pig, and it's kind of an experiment, and then they take the pig back and she goes on a mission to steal it back. And so this one was really touching to see the bond between her and the pig. It's also kind of a heist movie, so that's interesting. It has a good cast in it too. Visually, I think it's really interesting looking. Next is Long Shot. This is just a quick little Netflix, I think it's a Netflix original documentary just about this crime. I don't really remember what the crime was. I do remember what happened, but obviously I don't want to spoil it, so I'm just going to leave that and see. It's just an interesting story about the crime and about how they solved it. Next is Portrait of a Lady on Fire. A. That's an A tier. That's easy. It was just stunning. It was so beautiful. I loved the romance and the tragedy, and the sound is really good. And I don't know, because it is a simple story. There isn't much going on, but it's still able to capture my attention with doing so little, which is, I think it's a feat. It's harder to maintain someone's attention with doing little rather than, some Marvel movie where they're, fighting bad guys every 2 seconds, but somehow this is able to capture my attention more than an action movie, something like that. So this one was just beautiful, loved it. And so this is it for the new movies that I watched, and all the rest of these are ones that I've rewatched, so I'll probably just talk about them pretty briefly. First is Army of Darkness. I watched all the Evil Deads in 2020, so this was me finishing up the series. This one was actually, I think, the best one out of all of them, but I still think I'm going to put it in C tier. This one, I think they finally started getting into what they wanted to do, more into the comedy, more into the camp. So, but it still wasn't really my favorite, so C tier. Next is Spider-Man 3, B tier. I know everyone says this one's bad, and I remembered this one as being bad, but it was actually pretty good. I think that they were being funny on purpose. So funny and ridiculous on purpose, with the whole Peter thinking he's cool kind of thing. And it does get a little messy, but I still think overall it's pretty good. I think it gets messy with all of the different characters and some of the ways that, I don't know, some of the ways that plot lines are, like, it's kind of like, oh, we just need to get this person here, so we'll make up something to, get that to happen. So I do think it's a little messy, but overall I do think it's really enjoyable and funny on purpose, and just a good continuation of Spider-Man. I don't know. Next is American Ultra, which I'll put in B also. Has Jesse Eisenberg and Kristen Stewart in it, and it's about Jesse Eisenberg is this he's trained to be like this, fighting machine, but he doesn't know it. He doesn't have any memory of that, but he's triggered to, go into defense mode. And it's just funny, the dynamic of him being this stoner guy and also, being a deadly weapon. So it's funny. It has good action scenes. Love Kristen Stewart. There are bits of it that haven't aged very well, just in terms of like visuals, but I still think it was pretty good. Next is White Christmas. Not going to say much about that. A tier every year. Watch that every year for Christmas. It's good every time. It's good every time. It's one of my favorite musicals. It has a great cast, great songs, great dance numbers. I love everything about it. Next is Gaslight, which is a rewatch for me. I watched that a bunch of times when I was little, and I used to really like that movie, but it didn't age very well for me. I think it was a little boring, a little bit on the nose, which was disappointing, but it's still decently interesting, I think. Next is Cinderella. This is the one from the 90s with Brandy and Whitney Houston, another one of my favorites. I think I've been watching this one every year. It's a musical, the Rodgers and Hammerstein musical version, which I love. It also has like an all-star cast: Bernadette Peters, Whoopi Goldberg, Victor Garber, a lot of people that I love, and it's just so good. And I love that 90s A Wonderful World of Disney vibe. Same with Geppetto. Next is The Parent Trap. This one also didn't age as well for me, but I grew up watching it. I love it. Still gonna put it in B tier. And this one has some musical moments. I love how there's the kids' story and the parents' story mixed into one. I love Haley Mills. I love a camp vibe, a camp story, and this just has immaculate 60s vibes for me. This is like the pinnacle for me. Next is My Fair Lady, which I did a whole, I guess, a docu series on, kind of, well, not a series, but a video that took a long time for me to research, and I watched this twice, and I saw the stage version, and it was a big part of my life this year, and my appreciation for it has definitely grown the more I've learned about it. I love Audrey. This is definitely an iconic musical, and there's a lot that I do love about it. It's probably top of the list on B, but I'm not sure if it's quite A for me. Next is Saw. This one is, it's probably A tier for me. It's the best one in the series. It has mind-blowing twist, which without being convoluted, which is what the end ones end up being. It's just also really innovative. Next is Hans Christian Andersen. This is a musical from like the 60s, and it wasn't ever my favorite, but I like the songs. I like Danny Kaye. I still like it a lot. It's just I don't think it is very good quality in a way, and I personally don't necessarily like sitting through the whole thing. I more like it in clips, just the musical clips, but it's basically just probably some fake story about his life. I don't think it's really real. But next is Saw 2. This one was pretty good. I'll put that in B. It was a rewatch for me, but it's still pretty good before the Saw movies get really bad. There's a twist, but without it being too convoluted and over the top. And the story is still pretty interesting, so B. Next is the first Spider-Man. That's A tier. Tobey Maguire is the best Spider-Man for sure. And these movies have they've aged, some things haven't aged too well, but for the most part, I think they're super interesting. The characters are developed the most, the stories are the most interesting, the origin story and development is the most interesting, the villains are the most interesting. And I'll just put 2 up there as well for now. just 1 and 2 have the best villains. Green Goblin and Doc Ock are both iconic. I love Tobey Maguire. I don't really love the romance in either of these, in any of the Tobey ones, but that's pretty much the only thing I don't like about them. And that's it for my tier list. I mean, it's kind of hard to tell because there's so many, it's overlapping, but most of the movies are in B. C also has most of them, and other than that, it's pretty bell curvy, which I always say in all these videos. I like it to be, most of them in BC, just so I'm not, I know I'm ranking things fairly, but I'm really happy with these movies, that the new ones that I watched this year, that really stuck in my head and just made a lasting impact, and I'm glad to add them to my repertoire of knowledge. And there's also some really, really bad ones that I watched this year, which, also I'm glad to know that I don't like, and a lot of interesting ones along the way also. But that's it for this video. I'll see you in the next one, which is albums, if you're interested. So thanks for watching. Bye.